think so. What is it?
It's like maybe the second one down. Is it? Oh, no, God.
Okay.
It's the red one.
Red one. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. So yeah, let's start. Hi everyone. My name is Ade. I'm a medic at the University of Nottingham, and my project was on applying cognitive load theory to tackle differential attainment in international medical students for scope and review. Differential attainment is quite widely discussed in the community, in the medical education community, in the wider community as well. But just to give a definition in a nutshell, it describes the disparity in group performance in international students during medical school, and sadly that continues well into training, specialist training. And this first came into my view in 2015 when GMC made this report that found out there was a 75% pass rate among white UK candidates, but only 42.7% among non-European international medical graduates in postgraduate examinations, which is quite a staggering difference in percentage, and talks to that disparity of differential attainment. And I've included this article here because, as you can see from the article, the NHS is hiring more and more international graduates to solve the understaffing issue, especially in primary care, for example. So I can only imagine that this issue with the international graduates is only likely to become worse in the future, and it's something that needs to be addressed with novel solutions and now. But the good thing is lots of researchers have gone about tackling this issue. As I said earlier, differential attainment is quite a widely discussed topic. This usually involves having better learning environments and having more support from senior colleagues, but the problems differentially still remain. So that's when I'm talking about cognitive load theory, and especially extraneous cognitive load to tackle differential attainment. So the next question is, what is cognitive load theory? So cognitive load theory, in a nutshell, is an instructional theory that posits that your working memory, here, being limited in space, must be wisely used so that you can accumulate as much knowledge as you can to be stored in your long-term memory, which is theoretically unlimited. So extraneous cognitive load is a subtype of cognitive load theory, which is imposed on a person due to poor design of teaching material, or if the learner is made to perform task irrelevant activities, as demonstrated by this slide, which has the same information as the previous slide, but as you can see, some of them highlighted, some is in different fonts, some is underlined, some is in different colours, and the same diagram I use is much minimised and completely irrelevantly. There's a picture of Mickey Mouse there, which completely throws the person off the subject, and that's extraneous cognitive load. So higher the extraneous cognitive load, lower the amount of knowledge that's gained by the learner, and therefore this differential attainment continues. So how exactly is extraneous cognitive load and differential attainment connected? And that brings us to the causes of differential attainment in international medical students. And though it isn't a jury still out on it, there is a wide consensus that it's due to multiple factors, such as perceived racial abuse, having to learn a secondary language, adapting to a new culture, which all contribute to negative emotions, which causes that differential attainment. So, the proposed solution is to apply this framework to tackle differential attainment, and it's an approach that has not been considered by researchers or GMC. But the immediate roadblock I faced before starting this paper was there wasn't a reliable measure, universal reliable measure of extraneous cognitive load. And you would need such a universal reliable measure to find out how a particular task contributes to that extraneous cognitive load, and therefore how important it is to be minimized so as to allow learning, and that's why it's important to find such a tool to optimize the learning task, and that would cater to the learner's individual needs. So, the aims of this study was to perform a scoping review to identify the extent of the literature on the tools used to measure extraneous cognitive load, and also determine if a valid and widely accepted tool for measuring extraneous cognitive load has been published. So, to go about this project, to conduct this scoping review, I followed Arksy and O'Malley's guidelines, which are quite well established and systematic, tried and tested in multiple settings for scoping reviews. I looked at 3 different databases using a search matrix of major keywords relating to extraneous cognitive load. I included studies which measured extraneous cognitive load and were in English, and excluded only studies that measured overall cognitive load and not the subtypes like extraneous cognitive load. 2 search phases were conducted. In search phase 1, the titles and the abstracts of the studies were seen, and in search phase 2, full text of the selected studies were reviewed. And as you can see from my participant flowchart diagram here, 275 references were found in primary literature searches, and then I got to the final stage, search phase 2, 42 studies were used for data extraction, of which there were lots of different tools that were used, but to simplify it, I talk about in my paper as 2 different measures, 2 different groups: objective extraneous cognitive load measures and subjective extraneous cognitive load measures. So as you can see in right here, the percentage of the subjective measures was about 93% by a self-report questionnaires completed by participants after the task, definitely in the plenty. And objective ECO measures, though in the minority, use measures such as the response time to secondary tasks and eye tracking measures. Okay, so of the subjective measures that were used, the most widely used scale, thank you guys, widely used scale was Lepping's cognitive load scale, CLS. About 36% of papers use this measure. So, in the discussion of my paper, I talk about the strengths and the limitations of different scales, and how how a certain study went wrong in a particular context, how it can be optimized. But to put it in a general nutshell, I summarize it into 4 points. So, single item measures, which used only one question item to measure all of extraneous cognitive load, as it sounds, wasn't practical because it couldn't measure, it wasn't sensitive enough. Subjective multiple item measures such as cognitive load scale was more sensitive in measuring extraneous cognitive load, but had a problem in adapting it to different study settings. Another thing with multiple item measures, as I mentioned earlier, was because it was in a self-report questionnaire format, it led to response bias, and there was concern by many authors. And in this context of my study, the most important point would probably be the fact that negative emotions as an extraneous cognitive construct wasn't included. And that's very key to actually measure extraneous cognitive load in international medical students. So, the main scale that I mentioned in my study, Lepping's cognitive load scale, CLS, though it's been widely tried and tested in different study settings, about 36% of papers use this measure. The problem with it was that it wasn't able to, the 3 authors reported, was that it couldn't be used in multiple study settings, and it led to different ratings of extraneous cognitive load. And that is a problem because variations in the wording of items is reported to be an issue, as it leads to different cognitive load ratings. But again, there have been solutions by researchers, and one of them is actually holding cognitive interviews. The participants, before the task was performed, had interviews to find out what exactly was confusing to them, what exactly could be done, and what exactly was confusing. So that was changed, and that raised the validity of the scale. And second, more innovative measure was the informed rating system, where a similar PowerPoint presentation was given to the participants about cognitive load theory and its different subtypes. And again, having this information, the validity of the scale greatly improved by collection colleagues. That was the study that was conducted. Alright, so to conclude my presentation, is there a universal reliable measure? I think so. Lepping's cognitive load scale indeed is quite well established in the literature and can indeed measure extraneous cognitive load in the context of differential attainment, only with the nuance that there should be an extra ECO subscale to measure negative emotions. And to summarize my presentation, problems in measuring extraneous cognitive load and cognitive load in general differentially remain. Cognitive load theory is a fantastic theory, instructional theory that's quite discussed in the field now and has the untapped potential to actually address this issue. CLS, as I mentioned, has been tested in many settings, has been tried and has produced really very good results, but only with this extra subscale, I truly think it can be a good measure of extraneous cognitive load in international medical students. Some acknowledgements. I would like to thank my supervisor, Lydia Mattiova, for making this project happen, and the University of Nottingham Medical Education team, Stevie Aegis and Helen Church. Also, I would just like to add sort of 3 points to take home, because that's what this is for. One thing is differential attainment, as many people know, has been widely discussed in a BME format, in BME groups. And one thing that I want you to take home is that, especially in the climate that we're now, where we are hiring more and more international graduates to solve the understaffing issue, it's quite important that we understand that's an issue with international medical graduates, and this has a direct impact on the NHS and ultimately patient care. And secondly, what I would like you to take home is, what have I done with the project? So what's happened is, I found the scale, I found it useful, so what can I do further? What has actually happened is, I've got in touch with collection colleagues who did one of the scales I mentioned in my paper, and we've added subscales to the Leppings cognitive load scale, and I've been trying it on medical students and non-medical students. They're based in Germany and we're based in the UK, so we're trying it in the University of Nottingham Medical School and a German medical school that they're working at. So hopefully that goes ahead, and I'd like to publish that later on. So those are the two things that I would like you to take home. Thank you guys so much. These are my references, and thank you for listening. Any questions, everyone?
Apologies, we did start there.
I was going to say, can you do it again?
I might say let me do it.
Just the first slide, I think, for the definitions. That's,
Yeah.
That would
Okay, is
be
it fine?
Yeah,
Is it?
carry on. Go ahead.
So it was just talking about cognitive theory to attain differential attainment, tackle differential attainment in international students. So I talked about what differential attainment is, and it's widely discussed in BME context, for example. That's something that's in international students, in medical schools, all the way into training, and it's a major issue because